the way that dogs understand information is that whenever they're acting on a behavior, they're looking at what's in it for them. What are they getting out of that behavior? And that's why positive reinforcement doesn't work and negative reinforcement doesn't work, because even though you're dealing with very different energetic frequencies, right? Bad dog or good boy, at the end of the day, you're just in both of those reactions, you're reinforcing a behavioral pattern. Mm-hmm. So in a behavior that you don't want to continue and to be part of the patterning, you need to be able to show a consequence of action in that scenario in a language that a dog understands. And you want to reserve your verbal communication to make an impact in a very certain specific situation. So you don't want to just be overusing and abusing your voice, because then the dog becomes non-responsive.
I observe that many dog owners' relationships with their dogs is very codependent in many ways, and that dogs and cats, I'm using dogs because that seems to be more your forte, is it?
Yeah.
You know, that the dogs are dealing with the negative emotions of human beings, and that we're breeding dogs to do things for us at the expense of their own well-being. And, you know, I'm shamanic and intuitive enough to have seen many of my patients who have showed up with their dogs, and I can feel that the dog is actually carrying the owner's stress, or maybe they went through a divorce and the dog's actually really feeling the pain of the separation, or there might be a job loss and financial stress, and the dog really feels that their owner is losing it.
Yeah.
And so my own observation is that a lot of dogs actually embody the stress of the owner, but the owners often don't realize that the symptoms, the illness, and the change in the dog's behavior is the dog actually compensating for the owner. In other words, they're, you know, in especially in Eastern spirituality, you know, Yogananda talked about how gurus can actually take on karma for their disciples to help them through a disease process. And Yogananda, you know, was known to do that if he felt it was the right thing to do. But then the guru gets sick, and the guru wears out because they're carrying the karmic stress of the human being that they're trying to help. Could you share what your thoughts and feelings are about that, the psychological, spiritual intimacy, and why it, and what people need to be more aware of so that they're not dumping on their dog without maybe even being conscious that it's actually potentially really stressful to their animal.
Yeah.
And how like, let's say I was going through a real crisis in my life, how would I go through that crisis so that it didn't end up becoming too painful, stressful, or damaging to my dogs?
Yeah. Codependence in the human to canine relationship is very one-sided. Right? So humans are very dependent on their dogs for emotional support. I mean, look what we have, emotional support dogs now, service dogs, you know, and I see a lot of really broken service dogs that come to me because they're, as you said, and I love this part of the conversation, because this really is about, like, this explains the shaman dog. Like that's the natural essence of a dog. That's how they show up for us, is that they're so attuned, they're so sensitive, they are experiencing things in ways that surpass humans by light years.
Yeah.
And because we're so interconnected, they are absorbing that deep sadness, that deep stress, the deep anxiety. And a lot of times it's because as the humans, let alone the fact that dogs naturally are attuned to that and will absorb that energy, but we are literally giving that to our dogs. We're involving them. We're bringing them into that experience, not thinking about how is this affecting my dog. And so when you say the word conscious, being conscious, that's what this is all about, is when I'm in states where I'm feeling low, where I'm feeling like I need to be supported, well, what's the best way to do that? To go internal, to go inside.
Yeah.
How can we, right?
Or get help from another human being that actually has the framework of understanding, to understand how to give you empathy or support, because they have a framework for, like I don't think that a dog understands the concept of a broken marriage from a human perspective. Of
course not.
But what they do understand is that there's two people that they love that are really acting like they're in pain.
Correct. Right.
And then there's the urge to try to help in some way.
Sure. And that's naturally going to occur. What I always suggest is when you're in states like that, don't directly involve the dog. So when you're sobbing or when you're angry or frustrated or stressed out, that's a natural life experience. I don't know anybody that has not had those emotions or been through that, those experiences in their life. But when you're in the heat of it, when it's bubbling to the surface, when you're really thick in that experience, that is not the time to be directly engaging with the dog, right? So you can still have engagement, just like when I walked in today and Teddy approached me. Most people would say, oh, you're ignoring this beautiful puppy. Why would you do that? I wasn't ignoring him at all. There was volumes of communication. We were communicating on, and you could see his response to me, right?
Laying down next to you and kissing your toes.
Yeah, but
trying to nibble on them.
Yeah, exactly. Giving them a little nibble. What I felt from him was a sense of relief and relaxation and easement around my presence, right? And that was because I wasn't directly engaging with him like is normal and natural and instinctual for a human to do, right? And we talked about that. So that's the same in that situation. That doesn't mean that later today or, on Saturday when it's the time and the place and it's right and I can design that experience where my interacting with Teddy is going to enhance his life. But in that situation, it wasn't the right time.
What would the consequence be for him if you were like the typical person that just jumps out of their car and the dog doesn't know you, but they start just interacting with it? Although most people would be afraid to get bit, but give us the counter current. Like, what would somebody have done that you would not have said was ideal?
Sure. So, again, a dog who is at their home, at their property, they have no idea that a visitor is coming or a stranger is coming. And so the last thing that you would want to have happen, the last way that you would want to interact with your dog in that situation where you present yourself as a perceived danger, as a stranger to the dog. So you want to have a calming, a neutral effect. You want to present yourself as a non-threat, as one that comes basically with peaceful energy, with neutral energy.
Opposed to what?
As opposed to some wild, out of control person that needs to be managed and looked after, right? Because what would happen is if I would have engaged with him immediately, I would have put him in the leadership role. He's not the manager of this home. You are.
Right.
So if I would have gotten out of my vehicle, saw this adorable puppy, and immediately greeted him on his terms, well, that interaction is on his terms. So what am I doing? I'm verifying that he is the one in the leadership role in charge of managing this pack and this property.
Oh, that's interesting. Now I get it.
Yeah.
So, you see, because what I noticed that you did is you didn't face him directly. You almost turned a little bit sideways and didn't look at him directly. And at first I thought he's going to wonder why she's doing that. But I noticed that he, like you said, he just seemed to relax a lot, where what normally happens is they just jump repeatedly on people.
Right.
Which, some people like it, some people don't. But let me just give you a scenario so that people can really digest this. One of the most common things we get here is UPS men coming up. Now, the UPS men don't know who the dogs are, unless they've been here lots of times, but a lot of them, they behave like they're scared. And, of course, the dogs run and they want to jump and want to play. What would you say would be the right thing to do in a scenario like that? You're the UPS woman in this case. Teddy runs out or Samson runs out and they want to jump all over you or whatever. How would someone like a UPS delivery person apply the strategy you just talked about?
Yeah, so when you leave the dog out to receive that a perceived danger, because everybody that's external and outside of the pack, you have to understand for a dog that's a perceived danger.
Yeah.
Right? And so if the dogs have the space to be out and experience and receive that UPS driver, if you're present, which ideally I would say to be present in that situation, so that you can say, oh, hey, just ignore the dog, or please don't acknowledge the dog, right? And
I don't think most people would know what that means, though.
Well, that's why I actually say ignore, because people do know what that means.
Yeah, they do, yeah.
But you're actually not ignoring the dog when you don't directly, when you're not directly engaged.
Yeah.
Like I was saying earlier. So people that are afraid of a dog, when they hear, oh, I can ignore the dog that's coming at me.
Right.
Great. That puts them at ease. And then what I would say is, as you are showing up as the alpha male in that situation, you approach the dog with no words, with no eye contact.
You mean if I was showing up when the UPS man had showed up?
If you were in the background, kind of watching this,
right?
Right?
Okay, yep.
So you would approach the dog without saying a word, because you don't want to reinforce that behavior. You don't want to give a verbal command, because in that verbal command, that gives the dog the okay that they're actually supposed to be doing what they're doing, which is a whole other...
Well, what if they're jumping all over somebody and I don't want them to do that? Isn't it safe to say, Teddy, don't do that?
So what I would do instead, and this is a whole other... I don't work off of verbal commands because it's English and dogs don't speak English, right? They speak energy. So what I would say in that situation, instead of using your voice, if you were that far away, even giving a clap or a whistle or something that doesn't involve your personal
language
connection, your personal language, your voice with them, because the way that dogs understand information is that whenever they're acting on a behavior, they're looking at what's in it for them. What are they getting out of that behavior? And that's why positive reinforcement doesn't work and negative reinforcement doesn't work, because even though you're dealing with very different energetic frequencies, right? Bad dog or good boy, at the end of the day, you're just in both of those reactions, you're reinforcing a behavioral pattern. So in a behavior that you don't want to continue and to be part of the patterning, you need to be able to show a consequence of action in that scenario in a language that a dog understands. And you want to reserve your verbal communication to make an impact in a very certain specific situation. So you don't want to just be overusing and abusing your voice, because then the dog becomes non-responsive.